Hey guys, my name is Timothy Vaipan. Today I'll be talking about hemophilia, which is a genetic disorder. So let's get started. So let's start with what hemophilia is in general. It's an inherited genetic disorder, and it prevents your blood from clotting when you're bleeding. It's not really a problem until the hemophiliac, the person with hemophilia, gets a large cut. You see, normally your blood creates a fibrin clot with the proteins in the blood, but people with hemophilia do not have the proteins needed to create the fibrin clot. Because of this, they'll bleed for much longer than the average person. However, internal bleeding is actually more of a problem for hemophiliacs than external bleeding is. And that's because the blood can go into joints, muscles, or organs, and that can create a lot of damage, especially if it becomes a recurring thing. And depending on what proteins are missing in someone's blood determines what kind of hemophilia they have. For instance, people without factor VIII proteins have hemophilia A. Most parents find out if their kids have hemophilia or not either during or after the pregnancy. However, there are other signs and symptoms that point to hemophilia, which helps many people that do not take the test for hemophilia during or after the pregnancy. The most obvious sign is bleeding that takes a long time to clot and stop bleeding. However, hemophiliacs will also often bruise very easily, and they may also see blood when they use the bathroom. Also, nosebleeds that last a very long time are a common symptom. They could also have random spontaneous bleeding, where they begin bleeding internally or externally for no apparent reason. Most of these signs are visible at a very young age, as you are born with the disorder. Only a few times have people gotten it in later years, and most of these times it has happened to very old people after a pregnancy. Go figure. So there's a few types of hemophilia, hemophilia A and B being the most common. And what type of hemophilia you have depends on what kind of proteins you are missing in your blood. So hemophilia A is also known as factor VIII deficiency because factor VIII genes are missing in the blood. And then it's also known as classic hemophilia and standard hemophilia because it is the most common. Hemophilia B is also known as factor IX deficiency for the same reason that hemophilia A is known as factor A deficiency. And then hemophilia B is also called Christmas disease. We have many written records from ancient times describing hemophilia. One of the most famous is in the Talmud, where it is recorded that Jewish priests did not have to circumcise a boy if two of his older brothers had already died from bleeding out after their circumcisions. Many people also believe that the woman that Jesus healed, who had a bleeding problem, was a hemophiliac. The account of this miracle that Jesus did can be found in Matthew chapter 9, verses 20 through 22, Mark chapter 5, 25 through 34, and Luke 8, 43 through 48. So then, in 1803, Dr. John Conrad Otto published a paper on his own study regarding a family where all the males had bleeding problems, and he was actually able to track down the source to a female relative living in New Hampshire. 10 years later, John Hay proposed that men with the disorder were passing it on to their daughters, which were not affected, but their sons were, and he was correct. The name of the disorder, hemophilia, comes from a student at Zurich University, Friedrich Hoff, and his professor, Dr. Schönlein. They called it hemerophilia in 1828, which got shortened to hemophilia, and we call it hemophilia today. Dr. Alfredo Pawlowski did more research on it, and in 1947 he discovered the two types of hemophilia, which are types A and B. As many people and organizations continued to research it, they discovered all of the possible protein deficiencies over the years, which today we know them as factors 1 through 13. Hemophilia is also known as the royal disease because of how it famously affected many royal families during several generations. You see, it began with Queen Victoria, who became Queen of England in 1837. Her genes had spontaneously mutated to make her carry hemophilia. Her son Leopold had hemophilia, and he died from it after a bad fall at the age of 30. Her two daughters, Alice and Beatrice, became carriers of the disease and carried it to their children. Beatrice's daughter married into the Spanish royal family and passed it on to her boys. Queen Victoria's other daughter, Alice, passed it to her daughter, Alix, who married Russia's Tsar Nicholas, and their son, Alexis, got hemophilia as well. He was treated by the infamous Rasputin, and Robert Massie tells their story in the book Nicholas and Alexandra. So through the marriage and having kids, Queen Victoria affected the British, the Prussian, the Russian, the Spanish, and possibly even the German royal families. The only way to be sure that someone has hemophilia is through a blood test. And during the test, the thing that will be measured is the clotting factor. How severe the hemophilia is depends on how little clotting factor they have. There's a clotting factor level scale where 100% clotting factor is the standard, but anywhere between 50 to 200% is normal. People with hemophilia will have a clotting factor level very, very far below the standard. 80% of hemophiliac patients have hemophilia A, and the other remaining 20% have hemophilia B. While there is no cure for hemophilia, treatments have progressed to the point that people can live normal lives. See, the goal of the treatments is to get clotting factor in a hemophiliac's blood when they are bleeding to prevent them from bleeding out. Many early treatments included lime, oxygen, bone marrow, hydrogen peroxide, thyroid glands, and even gelatin. However, plasma transfusions proved to be much more effective, and these began in the early 1920s. Then in the 1930s, people saw that the diluted snake venom can make blood clot, and this began to be used. Then in 1950, researchers realized that freshly frozen plasma helped clot blood much better than normal transfusions did, and so that began to be used. However, hemophiliacs had to receive many, many bags of this plasma for it to work. Then, in 1965, Dr. Judith Graham Poole had a breakthrough. She found out that when you freeze plasma and then thaw it out, it forms a precipitate known as cyroprecipitate, which worked much better than using all of the plasma. In the 1970s, a freeze-dried powder version was created for at-home use, giving many hemophiliacs more normal lives. But then in the 80s, the rise of HIV and AIDS led to many bags of donated blood becoming contaminated, and this was true with hepatitis C as well, and this led to many hemophiliacs dying. So in the early 90s, synthetic blood was created and used for hemophiliacs, largely solving that problem. And synthetic blood continued to evolve, and in the early 2000s, newer versions meant that there was a smaller problem of allergic reactions to the blood. Just a few years before that, in 1995, prophylactics started to be used as a preventative treatment for little kids. Little kids that had hemophilia could start these treatments, and it would help them in future years to have hemophilia that wasn't as bad or as harsh. And then in 2013, 3 separate gene therapy trials began in the United States, and they are currently attempting to find a cure for hemophilia. And how are they doing it? They're using viruses to deliver working factor IX genes to the liver, hopefully making the liver create blood with the factor IX genes. Hemophilia is an X-linked recessive gene. What this means practically and at a real-life level is that a mom carrying hemophilia has a 50% chance of passing it to her sons as well as to her daughters. A dad with hemophilia will pass it to his daughters, but not his sons. However, the girls will only become carriers of the disease, while the sons will have hemophilia. In the early 1900s, there was no way to store blood or plasma for hemophiliacs yet, and so they relied on relatives to give them blood transfusions very quickly when they needed them. At this point in time, a male hemophiliac life expectancy was only 13 years old. And 60 years later, by 1960, it had only risen up to 20 years. However, today in the USA, due to preventative measures known as prophylactics and continued treatments, hemophiliacs can expect to live average lifespans. Hemophilia is not extremely rare, but it is not common either. Only 1 in 4 to 5,000 male babies worldwide have hemophilia. Hemophilia type B is 25% less common than type A, making hemophilia type A the most common. But luck often runs out for those who do learn they have hemophilia, as 50% of hemophiliacs then learn they have very severe hemophilia. There is prenatal testing that can be done, however, it's not always the best route to take. There are 2 tests available. The first is the chorionic villus sampling, or CVS. And in this test, DNA is taken from the placenta during pregnancy. A DNA test is run on it, and in about 10 days the results are in. However, it can only be taken between the 10th and the 13th week of pregnancy. During these weeks, taking the test comes with a 1% chance of miscarriage, and the chances go up when not done during these weeks. Then there's percutaneous umbilical blood sampling, also known as PUBS. It can only be done after 20 weeks of pregnancy, and involves blood being taken from the umbilical vein. The test only lasts a few days, however, it can only detect a few types of hemophilia. Because of miscarriage chances, many decide to test the baby after it is born. In fact, it is highly encouraged if the family has a history of hemophilia. Hemophilia A test can begin at birth, however, type B is not detectable until 6 months of age. And in fact, also the state of Missouri does not test for hemophilia in its official newborn screening conditions, so these tests must be additional. Because hemophilia is an X-linked recessive gene, women may carry the gene but are usually not affected, while males are. In 1974, the CDC estimated 17,000 men in the USA have hemophilia, and today the number is closer to 20,000. Gender is the only defining quality hemophiliacs have, and there is no distinction between social, ethnic, or racial groups. Hemophilia comes from a mutation in the X gene, which is one of the two sex chromosomes. A factor VIII mutation prevents coagulation factor VIII creation, causing hemophilia A, while factor IX mutations prevent coagulation factor IX creation, causing hemophilia B. So now you know about genetic disorder hemophilia, how it's caused, you know its history, its treatments, and so much more. But if you want to learn even more, I recommend going to these websites. They're really great. They really helped me out during this presentation. You can also read Nicholas and Alexandra by Robert Massey, which tells the story of the royal family and how hemophilia affected them so much. Just wanted to thank you guys so much again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to press that little bell button to get notified when I post another great video. Thank you guys for watching and have a great day.